Okay, everybody, we have made it halfway. Today I'm going to do Friday the 13th, part 5, or Friday the 13th, A New Beginning. And this one came out in 1985. It still clocks in around the hour and a half mark. And this movie was originally supposed to be Corey Feldman's movie. They originally wrote it as a direct sequel to the events in the fourth movie, but Corey Feldman ruined it for them, as has been the case for a lot of the people that they were going to make the stars of a sequel for Friday the 13th. Corey Feldman said no, and the reason he said no is he was filming Goonies, so he really couldn't do it. So he might have done it if Goonies hadn't come along, but I think he made the right choice. But he does have a cameo in the beginning of the movie. It does start out with him as Tommy Jarvis having a little nightmare, let's say, about Jason coming for him after he killed Jason in the fourth movie. To remedy the problem that they had with not having Corey Feldman to star in this movie, they made a time jump. 5 years later, it's still going to focus on Tommy Jarvis. He has been confined to mental institution after mental institution, trying to deal with the violence that he witnessed and the violence of killing Jason. Tommy is not doing well. This would make Tommy, let's say, about 17 now. They don't mention his sister in this movie. It starts with him being transferred to a new mental institution, which is not around Crystal Lake, but it's kind of a campish setting again. The mental institution for teenagers with problems, to help rehabilitate them and get them to a more normal life. The neighbors have problems with these kids being there and with their backgrounds. This older Tommy is played by John Shepherd, who has done some things here or there since this movie, but nothing really became of his career after this. I hear he didn't have the greatest experience making this movie either, and they actually made this movie in secret. Not secret, but they didn't really tell the people who auditioned for the movie what they were auditioning for, and he was not under the impression that he was auditioning for a Friday the 13th movie, which was the first strike against them. And they told a lot of the cast, or a lot of people who auditioned for this movie, that it was for a movie called Repetition, about a young person dealing with trauma of the past. And so he went all in by trying to study in mental institutions dealing with young people that have had trauma in the past. He thought this was going to be a real serious role and a breakthrough for him in his career. And then he gets there to film the movie, and it is a slasher horror film directed by a man who had previous experience in directing adult films. And as I called the last one the horny Jason, this one is obsessed with boobs. Boobs appear lots of times in this movie. They just pop out all over the place. And I know there's been nudity in the other ones, especially the last one. The first couple had nudity in it, but this one is just like boobs for no reason sometimes. And the so-called final girl in this one is going to be Melanie Kinnaman, who is playing the role of Pam. And she's not a teenager, she is actually one of their counselors. And following the previous one, you're going to have more than one survivor of Jason's killing spree. So in this one, there's 3 survivors. It's going to be Pam, Tommy, and Reggie. They're the ones that defeat Jason in this movie. And not all the killings in this movie are done by Jason. So the setup for this movie, the kids are in not an institution, it's kind of like a mental halfway house for troubled teens And one of the other teens actually goes on to kill another teen in the halfway house, and Tommy witnesses it. And then Tommy keeps having visions of Jason, and then Jason shows up. And there's a subtle difference in Jason's mask. Besides the wedge in his mask where he was hit with an axe missing, instead of the hockey mask where it has red markings, this hockey mask has blue markings. And this kind of goes against the lore of Jason being a supernatural being that just pop up and come back to life again. Is Jason the actual killer, or do we have a new killer in this movie? And I'm just gonna go ahead and say it. This is not my Jason movie. This is not my favorite Jason movie. This is in the bottom of the pack for me. And granted, it seems like they did dust off the story that they didn't use for the third Jason movie for this one. If you remember in my previous video where I talk about Friday the 13th Part 3, it was actually supposed to be a continuation of the final girl from Part 2, Jenny, where one of the storylines floated around until she decided not to do the sequel, was where Jason finds her in the hospital or mental institution where she has been and goes on a killing spree there. And so it's like they dusted off that script a little bit, changed a few things, and said, here's your Jason killing spree, finding his previous killer. And again, this movie is filmed on location in California, closer to Paramount Studios to help cut costs, but in a whole different locations around California than the previous one. And this is not at Crystal Lake again. So we have a departure from this movie being at Crystal Lake. This movie also leans more into the comedy of Jason. There's some ridiculous scenes in this one. So it's like a horror comedy this time. It's a as the last one had a different feel from the previous movies, this one kind of has a different feel all of its own, where it's a comedy horror. And you do have a few familiar faces in this movie. Like I said, nobody really like famous, but people that look familiar. You have the actor Corey Parker, who plays Pete, who has been in a few things that still acts today. I think he was in Mrs. Marvel. He was in some TV shows. He guest starred on Will and Grace at one point. I think he guested on the show Nashville as well. He's one of those familiar faces that you'll recognize. And the kid that plays Reggie, Shavar Ross, is very familiar to anybody like me of the Gen X generation, where you saw him guest star in a lot of TV shows during the time, like A Different Strokes, a Magnum PI. He has a very familiar face about him. He's definitely a known quantity of that time for people of my generation. And then I would say the last really familiar face in the movie is Miguel Núñez, who plays Reggie's older brother, who has a ridiculous scene, gets killed in a ridiculous way. It's all good and fun, but he's definitely a recognizable face who is a consistently working actor. Not famous, not well known, but familiar looking, and he has consistently worked for several years now. This Friday the 13th movie was still made around for the budget of $2 to $3 million. But this time, it didn't make as much money. It still made back its money, but it wasn't the success that the other movies had been. And this sort of shakes up the Jason franchise. It only makes about $22 million at the box office. So that's a good $10 or more million less than the others have been making at this point. And critically, I think critics hated this one more than they hated the last one, if that's even possible. I mean, like I said, so far the only critical praise that I have ever read from actual critics, the success that the other movies of the Friday the 13th movie is the third one, and that was mostly for the 3D special effects that were used in that one. This one, in my opinion, is one of the worst movies of the Friday the 13th franchise, except for its little weird comic relief. It has some memorable comedy scenes, which is weird for a Jason movie to have. But going back to the box office, even though it didn't make as much money as the previous ones had made, it was still a box office hit by the numbers, and that's why eventually you have more of these being made. This movie also had trouble behind the scenes. Half of the cast got along with the director, which this movie was directed by Danny Steinmann. Half of them didn't. It's really the main cast members that are in the movie longer that really didn't get along with him, and they found him abusive behind the scenes. But this is the only Jason movie he makes. His career gets derailed after this, not because of this movie or anything he did. It's because he was in a very bad car accident after this movie was made and really couldn't return to working in film even though he tried. But yeah, that sums up the 5th movie of the Friday the 13th series. And if you don't know and you're watching this, I'm trying to watch all of the first 10 Friday the 13th movies before or by Halloween, and I'm halfway through now, so I have 5 more to go. I'm not really looking forward to the last 5 of these, but I haven't seen these in a while. Maybe I will find a gem in the last 5 instead of going by my memory of what they think of. It's been interesting to watch these movies after all these years of not really like sitting down and watching the movies, or just like seeing them in the background or sort of paying attention. This is the first time in a long time that I have sat down and really focused on watching a Friday the 13th movie. But if you don't know, my name is Stacia, and I just like talking about movies. This is my little corner on the internet where I'm just a girl who likes talking about movies. And if that interests you, I invite you to subscribe to my channel. I'm trying to get to 500 subscribers this year. I'm within striking distance of that. I'm over 450 now, just a little bit more to go. And if you help me out with that goal, please subscribe. You can also help me out with that goal by commenting on the video. And I love your guys' comments. I love a little conversation where you tell me what you think about these movies, or your memories of these movies. And I like responding to the comments and getting that conversation going about film. It also helps if you like the video, give me a thumbs up. It helps tell YouTube to push it out to other people that might like this video as well. But thank you once again for joining me. My name is Stacia. See you next time. Bye.